All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight for this special presentation from the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. With us is David Harrelson, who is the Cultural Resources Department Manager for the Grand Ronde, and Travis Stewart, who is the Museum Curator and Artist for the Grand Ronde. And they'll have a special presentation about an art installation that is proposed for Milwaukie Bay Park. And just for the sake of a good flow for the meeting and making sure we get through everything, we'll have a question and answer period at the end. So if you want to just save your questions until then, I'm sure David and Travis will be happy to answer them then. So I'll turn the time over to them. I think, David, are you going to start the presentation? Okay, and you're welcome to just start sharing your screen in the presentation whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. It's good to meet many of you, and I hope that I get the opportunity to, as time goes on, get to meet you in person. As Jordan said, Travis and I are both from the Grand Ronde tribe. We're both tribal members. In addition to our roles with the tribe, which we're here in that capacity today to speak to all of you, I am the newest Oregon Arts Commissioner. So I serve on the Oregon Arts Commission, probably of interest to a lot of you. And since this is an arts project, I should mention that. I'm also on the State Advisory Committee for Historic Preservation that works on National Register monuments and other work like that. So I may see some of you, as many people who wear civic duty hats do many things and wear many hats. So we might run into each other in those capacities. But today I'm here to talk with you about a exhibit oh, it looks like I'm disabled from sharing my screen. So I'm here to talk with you about First Fish Herons, which we're calling a future community monument. And we
should be good now, David, sorry.
Oh, great. We're approaching the city of Milwaukie because we think that you have a wonderful location for this exhibit. I thought that before, just to confirm, can you guys see the presentation or the presenter's view? Okay, wonderful. I thought I'd give you some background and history just about the tribe, right? Many people I learn over and over go years and years, they can live their whole lives in Oregon, and for a long time it wasn't taught in our schools, and so a lot of people don't know about tribal history. My ancestry is Kalapuya. My ancestor, Joseph Shangretta, signed the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, which is the same treaty that the people of the Milwaukie area signed, but different people than my direct ancestors. What I'm going to talk about today, we're just going to do a historical overview. I'm going to talk about Chinookan art, which is a really important regional art form that is very much not recognized for what it is, and it's really wonderful that we actually have our own ancestral regional art form of this place. And then eventually, actually the shortest portion of the entire presentation will be the First Fish Herons proposal. And a part of that is that I've sent materials ahead of time, and there's a full written proposal. So I'll give a summary of that. I'll show some visuals. But there's about a 2-page written proposal that talks about what that exhibit is. So I'll just kind of add some flesh onto that and then leave time for questions. We're about 1 minute per slide. So Indigenous people, the people of this place, what you're looking at are maps of the area. The map on the left shows the mouth of the Columbia River stretching all the way down to where Portland is. And then the Willamette River takes off further south. And that area where you're seeing Clackamas is essentially where Milwaukie is today, and a large portion of the metropolitan area is actually within Clackamas traditional territory, some within Multnomah, and then the Cascades people. This other group, the Clawliwalla, had such an important role that they actually are called out as their own tribe oftentimes. And that's actually the tribe that controlled the fishery at Willamette Falls. And they had their own villages that were separate from the Clackamas villages, which were within eyesight of each other, such as the Clackamas village at the mouth of Abernathy Creek. In addition, of course, this is prior to contact, a large trade corridor, and Chinookan people, which is an ethnic identity that stretched all the way from the lower river at the mouth of the Columbia River, all the way up to what was Celilo Falls near present day The Dalles, Oregon. And So when you hear Chinook, there's a Chinook tribe, right, which is a tribe that's been seeking federal recognition, and you might see them in the media. But then there's a whole cultural ethnicity of Chinook people, of which names like the Clackamas, the Multnomah, the Cascades, the Wishram, the Wascos, those are all Chinook people. And in today's world, those peoples ended up on different reservations. So it's not as if there's one Chinook reservation. And so what's important to just recognize is the Clackamas are the people of the area of Milwaukie. Here's some more graphics to show that. This is a map of the ceded lands area. So there were over 7 treaties that were signed by peoples that came to the Grand Ronde Reservation. The most northern of those treaties is the Willamette Valley Treaty that the Kalapuya, as well as some Chinookan bands signed, like the Clackamas. And so I'm just highlighting the Clackamas again in these maps. This is the interior of a plank house. This is actually a plank house that's believed to be at a village that's underneath the runways at Portland International Airport today. And it was sketched in the 1840s. These are like multi-family dwellings. You see a large cook fire in the middle of the floor. You see large bunks on the side, different families meeting. There's a dog. There's mats made out of tule in the bottom. There's a fish drying rack that hangs above the middle. This is just a little bit of what the world looked like before settlers arrived. And here's a famous painting by Paul Kane of some Clackamas men with, you'll note, a nasal piercing, a painted forehead, and cranial deformation. They actually flattened their heads. So the man in the lower left-hand corner, as a baby, they would put a board on their head and it would flatten the head. And it's one of the ways in museum collections and archaeologically we identify our ancestors as flatheads, quote. Within the Clackamas view and really the Chinookan world, Willamette Falls, while it's not in Milwaukie, it's proximate and it's close, and it was a huge center of commerce and connection for all the reasons that Oregon City was established there, and the founding of the United States on the West Coast all happened at Willamette Falls. And for that reason, for well over 10,000 years, our ancestors, Clackamas people and their ancestors, lived at Willamette Falls in villages. Without going through all the history, we signed a treaty, which I mentioned a few times. The Clackamas chief was Chief Wachino, and so I've named that here, and I've shown the treaty area, which is in yellow. So that treaty goes south of Eugene. It includes all the way to Portland along the Columbia River, the crest of the Cascades, and in some places all the way to the crest of the Coast Range. So after, so after treaties, removal happened. And this is a sketching by a Frenchman, D'Argen, and it is a sketching of one of the dwellings that people lived in near Oregon City and the falls. It's actually believed that when the accounts in the newspaper of a plank house being burned down by local residents trying to drive Native people away during the treaty making process, that it's very possible that this is actually that plank house that was burned down. So even though our ancestors were removed, we have continued to stay connected to place. And this is actually a 1880s, early photography, one of the early, photography is a late 1800s thing. And this is a photograph from that period of time in the 1880s, and it shows people with a scaffold out fishing off of this island in the falls. And that's continued throughout time, from lamprey fishing to smelt fishing to salmon harvest. Native people came back. In the census records, a lot of Native people even lived off reservation, working in the factories and the mills and other things of the sort. And at certain times, the Indian agent, locals would complain, the Indian agent would come, round people up, bring people back to the reservation. And then, a few months later, people would be back, because that's just how the world worked and still works in some regards. Not so much with Indian folks anymore, it's just other folks. So the Grand Ronde tribe today, We signed 7 treaties. We're a confederation of over 30 tribes and bands, roughly 14 million acres from across Western Oregon. We have 5,500 tribal members. We have over 500 government staff. We operate Spirit Mountain Casino, which for a lot of people that have never heard of Grand Ronde, they've probably heard of Spirit Mountain Casino. There's an advertising budget that helps with that. And we are the owners of the former Blue Heron paper mill site in Oregon City. We also have various businesses that we do. Travis and I are only involved as tribal government employees who work in our cultural resources department and operate our museum and cultural center. So that's kind of our connection. Chinookan art. So if you mention Indian art, Northwest Indian art, everyone thinks of amazing totem poles, right? And that's a really great thing. And there's a lot of work that's happened within Indigenous arts to have that be a recognized art form. There's actually recognized as three easily recognizable subsets of Northwest Indian art. The most northern version of that is that totem pole art, and people refer to it as form line. It's practiced from about halfway up Vancouver Island into Alaska. The next is Salish art, which is about halfway down Vancouver Island into Washington State on the coast. And the most southern recognized, like Pacific Northwest Indian art, is Chinookan art. And it's the art form of the Columbia Estuary, right? That goes up the Willamette River, it goes to the Dalles, and it's the art form of that cultural subset of people, the ethnic Chinook people. And these are 3 pieces that are actually held at the Portland Art Museum that are on display. And if any of you have ever gone there, you've probably seen them. They're very prominent. The objects were removed from Sauvie Island or other villages near there. And this is just showing a couple like prominent, these are 2 carved stone pieces on the outsides, and the center is actually a bighorn sheep horn that's been steamed open and carved and etched into. And so some of the characteristics, and we're going to go through different slides, I'll talk through different aspects, is you'll see like a tri-platform face, you'll see rib-like figures, you'll see circles inside of circles or squares inside of squares. You'll see like a zigzag triangle pattern. And these are some of the motifs that you'll sort of see routinely through the art. This is art that's actually at the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge. There's a replica plank house that was constructed in partnership with tribal people. And once again, you're seeing some of those aspects that I just described. These are bunk rails. So we looked at that plank house earlier, and above each of the bunks were like family spaces or personal spaces. And so it was oftentimes like items that would denote somebody's personal space. So like a specially carved bunk rail would go above their bunk in the plank house. And these are modern examples of what a bunk rail could be. You have bighorn sheep on the left, and you have kingfisher on the right. And if you spy this well, and maybe you teach at PSU or you know Portland State University, this is on the 5th floor of the Urban Studies building, just above the streetcar line. There's an outdoor patio plaza that's really wonderful in the summer, but they hide out up there if you're ever looking for them. This is one of my favorite photos that I think has ever been taken while my time working in cultural resources. It's our 2 traditional canoes, Stankia and Olhayu, and we're delivering the man from Kashikshik's statue, which was art actually designed and created by Travis Stewart, who's on the call. And then beyond that, a great coincidence in this project, I didn't realize that Jordan worked for City of Milwaukie now, but at the time Jordan was doing work for Lake Oswego, and Jordan actually even put together a video about this dedication event. So that was a pleasant surprise when we got to work on this, and that I've been able to work with Jordan in the past. But this was installed, I want to say, in 2015, 2016. I could have that date wrong, and it's at George Rogers Park in Lake Oswego. It's a man, it depicts a story told by one of our elders, Victoria Howard, about a headman or chief who, it was a really bad winter, and the people were starving, and he taught the people how to go to Willamette Falls and get eels, and that saved them from starvation. And so he's holding an eel in each hand. But you see the tri-platform face, the ribs, and the zigzag pattern in the eels, or lamprey. They're not actual eels. Lamprey are an anadromous fish that lives in our rivers, and they're very curious creatures that are very old, much older than even salmon. Another example of Chinookan art is this installation it's called We Have Always Lived Here by Greg Robinson, and it was installed as a part of the Tillicum Crossing Bridge in downtown Portland. You see the coyote figures on the outside bent over, the 5 faces in the center of the bronze disc, and then the carved basalt piece on the right. One of the newest installations of Columbia River art is actually not in Oregon. It is up in Washington, and the Burke Museum, which is the state museum for the state of Washington for anthropology. It's on University of Washington's campus, and they did an install called Guests from the Great River. And this is a series of paddles, and each of the paddles depicts Columbia River art, and it depicts specific stories, econom or ancestral teachings and knowledge, these old stories. And it's this really powerful piece that shows traditional paddles, and the Chinook are sort of famous of having these V-shaped or U-shaped paddles. And so whenever we go spend time with other tribal peoples, people are always asking us about our paddles because we have interesting and different paddles. So now we've given you a little bit of background about tribes, why we're here, I guess the background of that, and a little bit about Columbia River art. First fish herons, the idea is old. It's a cultural practice, actually, that we still keep alive. And that traditional keeping that we maintain in community is we practice something called first fish ceremony. And at first fish ceremony, there's a whole series of protocols that go into that. But the essence is that when the first fish in the spring run comes and it's caught, we're supposed to have a big feast and a celebration, and ancestrally, people wouldn't fish for 5 days after that. And what it did is it ensured that the fish from the first run got up the river. But one of the elements of preparing for that ceremony is that we put out carved herons along the river, and they watch for the fish. And so this is a cultural activity that we do within our own community. As a part of this broader effort that happened, the Portland Monuments and Memorials Project that the Regional Arts Council put forth in partnership with Converge 45, this nonprofit, which wanted input about new monuments or memorials, like what could be done, what would a monument that reflected place and have value do. And so one of our 2 submittals for that was featured in this prototypes exhibit, which was downtown over the summer, was first fish herons. And we made this proposal to say that, well, we do this for ourselves and our community, but what if we took and translated that into a community art installation that was temporal in nature, so that it was only up for a period of time, which allowed us, like, each year to have like a dedication or an installation community celebration that brought people together. But it would also, bring awareness to the river and the fish and the things that are there. And so taking inspiration from the work that we do, which it wouldn't replace it, we would still continue our cultural practice, but we would add on this idea of installing 3 herons annually on plinths that would maintain their year-round, like stone-like figures like this, about 1.5 to 3 feet off the ground, so that when there wasn't something installed in it, someone could sit on it. And then the other part that we came with a lot of challenges around monuments or memorials is that they're so static. And what we really liked about something that was temporal, like a period of time, but also renewal as a part of that education. And so the proposal is to invite 3 different people each year to design new herons provide us, the tribe would do the work to identify them, pay them a stipend to fabricate the heron, and then at the end of the exhibit, right, or the period of time that they were up, they would come down and they would stay the property of the artist, who could donate them to a nonprofit to be auctioned off, or they could sell them at a gallery, or they could sell them on their Etsy shop if they wanted, right? But there's this idea of like developing capacity within the artist community, educating artists, right? We would generally always seek to have one of the artists of the three be a native artist, so that there was like a cohort and they could share and learn or talk with each other about the form. But then the other is, you know, celebrating this old tradition that's happened on the banks of the Willamette River in view of the river up and downstream since what we would say time immemorial, but sharing that in a healthy and authentic way and leading and guiding the community to like have ownership and make that a part of the community's identity. And so in that way, it would be a gift from the tribe to the broader community with an ongoing relationship. So in rough summary, as this can all be found in that in the proposal document that I sent ahead of time. And if you don't have that, Jordan or I can help get that to you after the meeting. But it's an art installation based in the cultural practices of the indigenous Clackamas people to foster informed and inclusive place-based community creation through ongoing programming led by CTGR. Milwaukie Bay is a wonderful place. I spent 4 years at Lewis and Clark College on the rowing team. I've rowed through at many early hours of the day. I've definitely seen a heron or two. It's a special place. And so when we did this idea, we thought, wow, what a great location for that. And knowing that also there was early outreach a few years ago to the tribe about doing development at the park. And so it seems like the timing for it could match up well. This is concept art that was created for that prototypes exhibit. It was made generically. In this case, it's showing downtown. The exhibit was downtown. It's also showing 5 herons, which we talked about since our ceremony has 5 herons. We thought for the community project, it might be more appropriate to do something different, like 3 herons, to still have 3 of something, but not seem like we're trying to have something replace the actual ceremonial activity, but build something new. These are all books and sources. People always ask me, how and what can I learn more? I can also send you this whole slide deck, and I can provide the slide deck to Jordan. But these are really wonderful resources for learning more about the native peoples of this area. They're generally pretty scholarly in nature. The plant book is a plant book, so it's not much about history, but there is little bits of ethnographic information. And then there's a whole report about treaties and fishing and everything else that relates to the lower Willamette River. But for the sake of questions, I won't stay on that, and I'll go back to this picture of herons, and I will open it up. Travis is with us, so he's available to help answer questions as well. And actually, maybe before I ask for questions, can I just, Travis, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll jump on for a second. Yeah, just to kind of introduce myself. I know Jordan did at the top of the meeting, but my name is Travis Stewart, and I am a Clackamas and Kalapuya descendant at Grand Ronde. I'd gone over to Milwaukie Bay just for a little bit of background a few years back, like because I was doing a lot of interpretive work for our museum out in Grand Ronde, and was coming over there and looking at the possibilities of maybe it was going to be art, maybe it was just going to be text panels to, you know, relay a little bit of the history of the area. And when this project came up, it was kind of instantly I thought about when I was discussing this with David, was just that Milwaukie Bay seemed like the perfect place for this to kind of kick off a project like this. And I really like the work that he's done and the thought that's been put into it, that it really does relay it. A lot of our work is focused around like the environment there and around the natural landscape. and how it's home to so many people now. And it's it's not just our story anymore, but this really offers up the opportunity to kind of relay some of those early traditions of the area and bring attention to the health of the river and the wildlife that live in it. And really just to have the community be able to participate in that, and each year be able to look forward to those herons coming out and knowing that the fish are running and they're back in the river. And if they're not, it also, that sends another message, really, because the thought is that these herons would only go in when the fish start to run, and if we're having a particularly low year, then they wouldn't be installed that year, is my general thought on that. So anyway, we can open up to questions.
I have a question. Would you be looking to install text panels, I'm guessing, either permanently or maybe just during the months when the herons are on display that talk about some of this history and background?
I do think that there's my audio come through. Yeah. There's an ability to do that. I think maybe our preference would be more towards like trying to provide like interpretive walks or other activities for that, and really allowing the pieces to kind of stand out and like try to have the community talk about it. But that's just how tribal teachings are, right? Like we have a preference for that. There's nothing that would stop that by any means. There have also been other conversations about, my understanding is there's an artist who's a tribal member that's working on a mural with the city and trying to integrate aspects of this into that mural. So there's sort of like a continuity to the story of that place. I'm hoping that we create enough of kind of a splash, right, with the community event and interest that people are like, oh, what's that about? With maybe some supported or guided tours or other activities. But that is always an option. I think that the other part is trying to just capture the temporal component of it, as opposed to putting up a sign all the time that tells the story like that. It's not as authentic to it, but it's possible if it's needed.
We have two hands up. We'll go with Council President Kathy Heidi and then Ben Johnson.
I think Ben had his hand up first, but I'll be quick.
Sorry.
Thanks for the presentation. I don't know that I could love this project more. This is so cool. And after hearing your description, I think I would love to have this sort of folded into the oral tradition and have it become a part of Milwaukee's oral tradition rather than a written piece. My question is, how long do you think the herons would stay up? Would they just be up for the general run of the salmon, or would you have kind of a set removal time for them?
Yeah, so that's, you probably heard me get maybe a little wishy-washy on how the ceremony works today. And that's because there's all these challenges, like we do a big community event when it's not COVID, right? And you have to like set that date on the calendar, and you can't really guarantee when the fish are going to be in the river. And so, that is, I think that the intention is probably from about March to May, or maybe late February through the end of May, early June would generally be about the time when the spring Chinook run is on in the river. And so, we would end up having to set dates even if it didn't fall perfectly. And Travis and I are, we've done this for a long time. And I think over time as administrators, we've become more practical to be flexible in those ways. So we would end up like setting dates, and it would probably be much more consistent year to year. But we would want to be able to have that conversation. There's great concern that we may find a time in all of our lives that there are no longer fish in the river. And I think that then we would want to have a conversation about like what that meant, right? Because our myths and narratives say that when fish seek to be in the rivers, that native people will cease to exist, right? And so there's this intricate kind of tie to that. And that is a part of what we're trying to do is yes, it's this cultural practice, and yes, it's beautiful, and it has the ability to teach art and sharing and culture. It also kind of, not directly, it indirectly just draws attention to fish, right? And caring about the fish that are in the river, or if you see them, it sparks that thought that there's fish in the river. If all of the fishermen trying to get their boats in the water at the dock wasn't enough of a reminder, but yeah.
Maybe if I could just add something real quick to that, is I think that, I don't know that this necessarily illustrates that the kind of the sketches that you're seeing here, that kind of the ideas moved a little bit more towards that base being like a basalt, basically big stone seat would be a place where people would sit and reflect on the river and the landscape when the herons are not in place. And I think that also, it's, even though we want to have some regularity, I also really like the idea of the fish and the health of the river kind of dictating when that happens, and not letting us have all the say on that.
It did spark one thing, and we're good for time, I think. So I want to just say that, these are just basic graphic images, and all these look alike. But if you're inviting different artists, as long as they work, the idea would be to set the parameters of height, size, weight, what it's going to be mounted on. And, besides getting approval, right, for any art that would go up in the city, there would need to be approval for it. You might have a modern artist that has bright colors on it, or they might, do something that is just completely different than ancestral. And that is perfectly good with us, right? Like, we're not trying to invite people to do native art. We're trying to get artists to engage with a practice and work together.
Ben, and then after that, Gary.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
David and Travis, thank you so much for this presentation. My name is Ben Johnson, and I'm the chair of the Milwaukie Parks Advisory Board. And, we have a lot of love for Milwaukie Bay Park and are excited about all the improvements coming along. And this proposal is super cool and very exciting. And I like the kind of the ritual of it too, that there's going to be something new and regenerative every single year that brings people down to the park. I think this community really embraces that, and the educational value, I think, from you all's teaching, from what I heard tonight, I think is going to be super cool. I do have kind of a in the weeds sort of question, and forgive me because this is the nature of what I do for a living, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on like where these sit, because the riverbank there is so nuanced, and there's like, it's doing so many different things. And obviously in the spring, the water fluctuation is kind of crazy with, snow melt and rains. And do you see these plinths with the herons being accessible so people can walk right up to them? Will the basalt, like portion of the basalt, be below ordinary high water? So I don't know. Do you understand my question? And
Yeah.
Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the only requirement is that there's a view up and down river from the location. I think that roughly, and we're early enough in the process that having just intro level conversations with staff, it seems like the idea of taking the plinths and kind of baking them into the cake of the design, like the infrastructure design. So that idea that it would likely be up and above, like out of the flooded areas or out of the regularly flooded areas, I should say, right? But it would be a part of like the infrastructure, the paths, and the open spaces, design space of the park.
I see. So it'll be much more up in the upland portion of the park, above even that lower path.
We haven't tried to cite it yet or have those conversations. We just want to make sure that there was general community interest, and there wasn't a better idea that everyone had already decided on.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, if there's any consolation on that, the day that I'd gone to visit in particular, the river was way up and the park was like completely flooded. So that was definitely something that came into consideration at that time.
Gary, and then we'll go with Mayor Gamba.
Thank you. I'm Gary Klein, and I'm on the Park and Rec Board, and I was on the predecessor Milwaukie Riverfront Board and Riverfront Task Force. My family's lived here, nothing close to the indigenous people, but been here since '48. And I'm just going to say that if you're looking for a place, I would talk to my family because we have restrictions on the Klein Point area, but that might be something there might be a good location for some or all of these, whatever you're looking at. So I'm just going to offer that thought too. Thank you, David, and all your work on this. I think it's wonderful.
Mayor Gamba.
Hi, sorry I had to join you late. I was getting out of another meeting, but I have to agree with Council President Heidi. I couldn't love this more. It is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. I'm so excited. I love the transitory nature of it. I love the concept of the oral history attached to it that we could build on. Everything about it is really great, and I look forward to seeing these in the park.
There's no more hands, but we still have time if anybody else has questions. Councilor Heisey?
I mean, if you're going to give me the option, I'll. I'm just thinking about the invitation to the artists. Have you given thought beyond wanting to make sure there's an opportunity in there for at least one tribal artist? Any other populations you would like to particularly touch, or any kind of original outreach? This is kind of an awkward question because what I'm thinking about is that when I'm trying to think which project it was. It was something Metro was doing, and it was a relatively small grant process, $5,000–$10,000 that they were doing. And they really thought about who they were reaching with traditional application forms and decided to broaden their approach and accept video submissions and to do the outreach a little differently because they realized that there were equity issues embedded in presenting everyone with that same form with the lines you got to fill out and what's your occupation and all of that. So to remove barriers, they changed the form and they got some wonderful, amazing creative projects. So that was a long story on my part. Maybe you can thread out a question from what I've said there.
I can share that I'm very comfortable with work around that, both with the Arts Commission. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the Arts Commission, was to work on that type of work. We've done some really great work with Oregon Folklife Network, where we've actually found that some people feel a lot more comfortable being nominated, right? So like that idea of like opening up the ways that people apply. So far, everything that we've talked about with this is really the tribe inviting people, right? So it's like being asked. It's such a small number of people. In general, that might look like, the administrator for the tribe's programmatic part of this would be me, the Cultural Resource Department Manager. I would take it on, and just one of the things that I would do. In addition, I should say there's 22 staff in the Cultural Resources Department. Travis supervises about half of them as our museum manager. We have another manager that supervises kind of the other half, and I'm kind of the political go-between, and the odds and ends programs all end up with me. So, through my role in the Arts Commission, also wanting to have like a regular update or whatever the process might look like for the Milwaukie Arts Committee, right? Talking with people and hopefully being able to learn about artists that are doing work or artists that live in your community. Yeah, I think that that's sort of the idea. To me, the reason why we put forward these proposals, which were not expected to happen at first, was to build community and connect community around art. And for us, you know, our reservation is really far away, and having a reason to come to town, right, and connect with people that are around is kind of the desire for us. And so that's sort of, it's, yes, I want to see those things happen. It's 2 people a year, so I'm not quite as worried about the strategy of it. Yeah.
I think that there's also just one of the thoughts that we've had all along was really just using this as an opportunity, like not only to educate the public but by doing and inviting different artists from different walks of life and to participate in this project with parameters that also gives us the opportunity to kind of share with those artists that are selected kind of the history and culture of the area, and also just to create exposure for the artwork as well, I think.
We have one last question from Heather before we need to wrap up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jordan. And thank you, David and Travis. Your generosity of thought and time in bringing this idea to the city and NCPRD is really appreciated by me and all of us on staff who've been part of this so far. It's great to hear people's comments today. I had just one question about something that came up in the past, which is the thought as to whether this ties into future installations possibly elsewhere, and if that still is something that conceptually you're exploring.
Yeah, so a part of this was the thought, and a part of it was why to move to 3 installations instead of 5. We realized that, you know, this idea of bringing attention to the fish in the river is really pertinent throughout the entire Clackamas territory. And that if people are interested in that, it could be something that was replicated. There may be, you know, a few days where we go up and we have all the different herons in different communities, and we install herons all along the river and have little events with each of the communities while we do it, where we come and we teach, you know, we provide teachings, we sing some songs, you know, we bring tradition, we bring tribal heritage kind of to the place and in partnership and have it come alive. I think that one of the, like at the former Blue Heron site, as the tribe's developing the Willamette Falls project, I think that that is a very likely and potential. But yeah, it is something that is potentially replicatable as an idea. And so we are interested in that. I think that when we think of the best place on the lower Willamette River to do it, it is Milwaukie. That's why we want to do it in Milwaukie first. But there is that potential. So thank you for bringing it up, Heather. I don't know if I can take that on, though. I might have to find enough funding to hire someone to administer a program.
It does create this opportunity for like a sort of pilgrimage each year for like if the program was to expand, for people to really spend a day, go out visiting the different parks and getting people out exploring a little bit too, and drawing more attention to different areas along the watershed. So
well, thank you so much, David and Travis. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and for sharing all this with us. I believe one of the next steps is Travis and David, you're coming to a city council meeting, right, to talk a little bit more about the proposal, or am I jumping ahead? But we will definitely send out updates. Scott, do you remember what the next step is?
Yeah, it's mostly along those lines. That Scott Stoffer, City Recorder. Thank you, David and Travis, for being here, and thank you everyone for participating in this presentation and providing your comments. The next steps is there are 3 entities involved at this point: the city, North Clackamas Parks, and of course the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. We're going to have some staff level meetings, and I believe the next steps is check in with each of the governing bodies of each of those agencies for working on perhaps an intergovernmental agreement as we move forward. This was really the best opportunity, we thought, to present the idea to the community writ large, Milwaukie, and also with our regional partners. And so this has been recorded. We'll make sure we get it up and distributed so folks can share it. But then I think each of the agencies will be taking steps with its governing body to check in on this project and hopefully continue to keep it moving forward.
And after this, we're continuing our regular arts committee meetings. So if you want to stick around for that, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, yeah, really appreciate everyone coming tonight. It's great.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.